Well, welcome everyone to the Atheist and Christian Book Club. We are a monthly get together of both believers and skeptics, respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. We've been doing this now, I think we're in our seventh year, I believe. And we usually have the author with us, which we are going to have this time, the author of the book we're discussing. And we alternate books. We do a Christian book one month and a atheist book the next month. My name is James Walker. I'm president of Watchman Fellowship, an evangelical Christian ministry focusing on interfaith evangelism and other apologetics. And the other co-founder you'll meet in a moment, Bill Cluck, is a former Christian, now atheist, and we've been good friends now for over half a decade now. So we'll get to meet him in just a moment. I will introduce our author in just a moment to you, who's also coming back. It's, I think, the third or fourth time. But before I do that, I did want to take just a moment to talk about next month's book club, so you guys can go ahead and put a bookmark in that. We are having Dr. Robert Bowman, Jr., discussing his book, The Incarnate Christ and His Critics. Rob Bowman is the president of the Institute for Religious Research in Cedar Springs, Michigan. He's a co-author. He's the author or co-author of 15 books and numerous other published works on apologetics, historical Jesus studies, Christology, the Trinity, and various religious movements. Dr. Bowman has an MA from Fuller Theological Seminary, a PhD from South Africa Theological Seminary. He's lectured at Biola, at Cornerstone University, Luther Rice, New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and elsewhere. But he's also a good friend of mine and former staff member for many years with me at Watchman Fellowship. He will be our guest next month, which can be May 8th, 7 o'clock Central Daylight Time. We'll be starting then. And his book, again, is The Incarnate Christ and His Critics. We'll put that up on the Friends of the Atheist Christian Book Club and also on atheistchristianbookclub.com, where you can get the book. And we will also have a podcast alternative for those who don't have time or access to the book. If you listen to the two podcasts, I think you'll be ready for that discussion. And my guest today, our guest author today, back for more punishment, John Loftus. John is also a friend. We just got to meet his wife. Brady Blevins and I just got to meet his wife for the first time, and he's actually in town. This is not clever photography that we're doing. You're actually not at home. You are in Texas, and pinch yourself. You're in Texas, and but he's here in my home with me, doing the Zoom in person. Some people take this real seriously, and John's one of them. So he says, I'm not going to do it on Zoom. I'm going to come to your house and do it. So all the way from, you're in
Fort Wayne,
Indiana, all the way from Fort Wayne, Indiana, by way of south of Houston. So
That's right.
long story.
Right.
But anyway, perfect timing for this to work out for him to be here in person, to do the Zoom with us. John is philosopher and counter-apologist who earned MA, MDiv, and THM degrees, the last of which under William Lane Craig, the famous Christian apologist. Now, John, were you his biggest disappointment of his entire academic career?
Well, I'll tell you, I wasn't just his biggest disappointment. I mean, he doesn't even mention me. He doesn't even acknowledge my existence.
He ghosted you.
It's bad. It's bad. It's that bad when you were friends at one point, but he doesn't even acknowledge you. It's okay. It's all right.
Well, but you have friends. You have friends in all places. So hopefully, still,
Yeah.
Bill Craig will be your friend too, I'm sure. John studied in a PhD program at Marquette University. He's the Debunking Christianity blog owner. Is that still going real strong?
It's going okay. It's not as not like it used to. I think people are going to YouTube and content creation right now.
Oh yeah, yeah. But he's the owner of that blog, and he's author of 5 critically acclaimed books. Why I Became an Atheist, I think was your first book. The Outsider Test for Faith, How to Defend the Christian Faith. Thanks for the advice. Unapologetic, and God or Godless, with the Randall Rouser And he's also the editor of 7 critically acclaimed anthologies, collections of that he edited and put together and participated in. The Christian Delusion, I think that might be Bill Cluck's favorite book of
Oh,
yours.
okay.
The Christian Delusion, The End of Christianity. Christianity is Not Great. You have to pay Richard Dawkins some
No,
royalties on
no,
that
no,
title.
no.
Okay, okay. Christianity in the Light of Science, The Case Against Miracles. I think we had you for that book earlier. And then I know we had you for Varieties of Jesus Mythicism. I think that was the last time you were with us. And then we're going to talk about, also the author of God and Horrendous Suffering. And I don't think we've ever done that book with you, but that is certainly would be a book worth doing. What we are going to be doing is in this book club is discussing his book, Debating Christianity, focusing our focus chapters being responding his introduction to debating David Wood in 2 occasions. Now, the whole book is fair game, and so I'm hoping we get some questions from other chapters as well, but we do try to have 1 or 2 focus chapters. So if you don't have time to invest in reading the whole book, you could at least talk about those sections. But it's interesting, John, your book is basically the transcript or maybe the notes that you took in with you to all these Christians you debated over the years. And we're getting the introduction to those things. And I kept wanting to stop and go find on YouTube or something the actual thing, find out what happened at the end of this thing at all. But what was your first debate? Was it this one with David Wood that about the
Uh,
existence of God?
Probably my first debate was with Dinesh D'Souza
Oh, okay.
over in Champaign, Illinois.
Okay.
And we were talking about whether God exists. And I remember I gave all kinds
And
of
that
reasons.
is a chapter in the book too.
Right.
Yeah.
I gave all kinds of reasons, and Dinesh stands up and says, "Well, he gave all kinds of criticisms of God and stuff like that, but does the guy exist?" or something like that. It's crazy. It's like, wait a minute, that's exactly my point. Does God exist? But he's was really good at you know sound bites, and it was hard to beat him.
And sometimes I feel like the person that wins the debate might not be correct, but they're good at doing debates. And sometimes you
He
can do
is.
that. And
He is.
now, John, I've done a couple of debates myself with mostly with Mormons and Muslims, but I always have this sick feeling right after it's over. About 20 minutes afterwards, all these ideas pop in what I could have said.
Oh yeah.
And why did it vacate my mind when I most needed it?
That's why I like writing books, because I go over a sentence 10 times and then I go over the paragraph 10 times and I go back to the sentence 10 more times. And I know what I'm saying. Pretty much, I'm pretty articulate about that. And I've covered most of the bases. And even after that, I'll go back and reread the chapter and reread sentences. So, but when I'm talking, it's like, oh, I forgot to say this. I forgot
Yeah,
that.
no, I've had that feeling. So, what we're going to do is those who want to join in, if you have a question or comment, I'm going to ask them first and give Bill Cluck, our other co-founder, a chance to ask the first couple of questions. Then, if you have a question, if you'll just type it into the chat, and either Daniel Ray or Brady Blevins will be looking for that, and they will tell you we will tell you it's time to unmic or to mic up and go ahead and ask your question. If you prefer not to come on camera or not to voice it, you can also ask them to ask the question for you, and we'll try to do the best job that we can on that. But just to kind of get us warmed up, John, how many debates were you covered in that book? So it's just your introduction portion, but you have the
Yeah.
introduction. The D'Souza, you have 2 with David Wood.
Yeah.
How many total do you remember having?
No, I don't. Probably about 12. I don't know if they're all.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
it was about a dozen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, John, sometimes people think that when you're giving the debate, you always think you win. That's what There's
No.
a tendency to do that.
No.
And then for me, there's some that I think, man, I think I really won that one. And then some I think the jury's out on it, and then some of them I think, wow, like I said, I wish I had thought to say that at the right time. So looking back on that that's a lot of debates.
I have had that feeling where I sat down and taking the questions and asking myself, oh, looks like it doesn't go too well for me, depending on the questions being asked. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I had done that or done this better, but I didn't. So nothing I can do about it.
What's the one that you kind of felt like the most comfortable with when you were done? You really felt like you got it all out there, and it was the best debate, do you think, looking back on them?
None of them. No, I did really good with Wallace Marshall. I think he's an apologist. I get his names, front and back names mixed up a bit.
Uh-huh.
Wallace Marshall. He was a really good friend and debater, and we may debate again. But I really thought that debate was probably my best one. Not that I convinced anybody. I wish you could say, well, the winner of the debate is the one who won over more to his side. Well, that never happened.
Yeah, and I think it's not just the people doing the debates, but the audience as well seems to you always feel like your side won, So I feel like that, So there's usually a few cringe moments in any debate, but for the most part, you think, okay, my side won, and maybe that's part of our cognitive bias that we're
Definitely.
hearing the things that we want to hear, and then we're not able to absorb those things that we really don't want to hear.
Yeah, actually, cognitive science has shown us that your brain is a defense mechanism against weird, strange, and odd beliefs. And, they have all these beliefs are tagged, and they're tagged in the sense that
Hmm.
this has got to be wrong because it's new. And so the brain fights that, and it will come up with all kinds of excuses and reasons for thinking that even though you heard a powerful argument, the brain can shut it down with one or more logical fallacies. I mean, it does. It's been proven. So it's been such that even after hearing some really good, powerful arguments that they cannot answer, they go on believing, thinking that, good, I listened to that and my faith is stronger. I mean, they walk away because the brain, it acts like a defense mechanism. It actually is it's like it's almost like it's under assault. So it throws up all kinds of excuses, not always said, but sometimes said, but a lot of times not even voiced. They say, well, I've heard that argument and I still believe. So, praise Jesus. So, but that's just because that's how the brain works.
Yeah, we had the Christian author Justin Brierley on early in our book club, and he's from the UK, and he does things similar. He'll have atheists on, and he'll moderate discussions between Christians and atheists, and he's been doing that for years and years. So we found out a book, and his book was something along the lines of, you know, how could I be hearing the best atheist arguments for all these years and I'm still a Christian? And so I just wanted the short answer. Was it just stubbornness? It was just like you refused to listen to anything they said, or was there more to it than that? But sometimes the idea that you survived the argument, you didn't really answer it, you didn't really do that, but you did survive it. You're still a
Right,
Christian or you're
right,
still an atheist, so
right,
you
right,
survived
right.
it. That's different than being able to, deal with it
Well,
directly.
most of what we do is we simply say, well, that's an interesting argument, but it doesn't trump, this, whatever this might be. And usually it's the this of my raising, how I was raised, but they don't mention it. It's all going on subliminally
Hmm.
in the brain. That won't trump my belief in Jesus because I experienced him. Well, you can't ever argue against that very effectively, not with a logical argument, because they had a feeling. So these sorts of things can always be used to trump even the most powerful reasons. I'm talking from the perspective of a non-believer. I'm not trying to incorporate your the Christian beliefs in that with the description. So it seems like that's got to be you can't overpower that. You just can't do it.
Well, what is the real value, you think, John, of doing these debates?
Um, Eating out with my good friend James Walker.
Well, it's sometimes there's a lot of benefits besides winning an argument, and I would,
No,
and
no.
being in the area of apologetics, sometimes I know historically been more interested in trying to win the argument than winning the person. And one of the things that the book club has helped me with is to become friends with some of the local atheists, but also with some atheist authors like you. And
Likewise.
it helps me refine my thinking. Like I sometimes say, all my ideas sound genius in church, but when you're outside of church and you're talking with somebody who's well read and philosophically minded, then you realize maybe some of your arguments are better than others.
Well, let me give you an example here. I see that Phil Blair, my friend there, is here, as is Ken Daniels, and I learned from both of them. I read Ken's book, and I thought this is really a nice way to say things. You know, this is
Mm-hmm.
really, yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way before. I like learning. Learning is good in itself. And Phil, he jabs me a little bit here, and he jabs me a little bit there, but
But it's good for you.
he forced me to come up with some things that I thought were pretty good. So I threw them back at him, and he was unfazed. But that's how that works. So yeah, I like that interchange. I like feeling good because they've made me better. I mean,
But it helps
yeah.
me to think. Like again, to me, there's sound arguments as that we talk about your book on horrendous suffering, and there's some quick answers that me and other Christians will throw out there. Well, it's because of the fall and stuff like that, and you can explain some of the problem of evil or horrendous suffering. You can explain it, I think, satisfactorily, but the problem is a lot deeper than you think it is, and the surface answers don't fully answer the whole. When you start looking at the different, talk about animal suffering, things like that, and you start thinking about the issues, it's a harder problem than you think at first to have a glib answer that you can just throw out.
Well, philosopher James Sennett said that he tells his philosophy of religion students that if they haven't uh, thought seriously about the problem of evil, um, then how do you say? Then you don't understand it. If you haven't been shocked by the problem of evil, then you don't understand it. That's what he says. That's how powerful of an argument it is.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's good. What I tell people is that when I've spoken on this subject before or teach on it, I'll say, I really don't have an answer to the problem of evil. If I did, I'd win the Nobel Prize.
Well,
But I do have some clues that I can maybe help you with, but no complete answers, I don't think.
well, the only group of people who don't have a problem with the problem of suffering, as I call it, are people who don't believe in a God. Because suffering is what you would expect to find if there were no God and evolution operated by blind chance. This is exactly what you would expect to find.
Still isn't a very pleasant perspectives.
Yeah, well, pleasantries
Yes.
aside, we are looking at for the truth.
Okay, that's it. Let me ask you about this. And again, if you have a question and want to get in on the discussion, if you'll text that in, and we can put you in the queue for that. This is your introduction. It's chapter 2, introduction to your debate with David Wood. I think your first debate with David Wood about the existence of God. And there, at the very outset, you say this. You say, I'm going to start out by granting that a minimal God of some kind might possibly exist. And then you talk about Richard Dawkins and Stenger and others admit that possibility as well. So definitely not the God of the Bible, though. You can 100% rule that out, right?
Actually, there's a lot to ruling it out. James Sturba from University of Notre Dame has resurrected the problem of horrendous suffering, and I think he's done it. He's actually proved that the three hypotheses of God being omniscient, omnipotent, and all omniscient cannot exist. These attributes are basically contradictory. So I think that has been proved. Now you'd have to look and read what he wrote to see that, but he had respondents from different disciplines come and criticize his argument. There were 30 different responses from Christians and atheists alike. And he dealt, all you can ask is, did he answer all the objections? Not whether you agree with them all. I mean, you might not agree with them all, but he answered all their objections.
Well, what What would you mean? What do you mean by a minimal God? It almost sounds like a oxymoron or something. So it's the opposite of God, a God that's not actually God or something.
Well, I mean, like, okay, you got the ground of all being, which is Paul Tillich's God. You got Friedrich Schleiermacher's
Hmm.
the religion is a feeling, and those kind of gods. And you have the deist God.
Well, okay, I was wondering if that you might be referencing a kind of a absentee landlord type God, deism, that he's not responsible for the horrendous suffering because he kind of checked out and doesn't really even know what's going on.
Yeah, I actually described the deist God in the final stage of deism anyway. That God is the absentee landlord of a slum world that deserves to be condemned. That's
Yeah, you have later on in the
that-
introduction, because we were talking about, I looked it up real quick. I highlighted it. It says, such a belief, this traditional understanding of God, such a belief is consistent with a God who created the quantum wave fluctuation that produced this universe as his last act before committing suicide.
that's a possibility.
So there was something that was maybe not all powerful, but powerful enough to create the entire universe. But
Well,
if that God did exist at that time, he doesn't exist
keep
anymore.
in mind that when we're talking about God having created the universe, we're only talking about a quantum wave fluctuation. That there could be a God that might have done that and then went out of existence. Now, I'm not going to hang my hat on that. I'm not going to say this is it and try to defend that. That's for scientists to discuss. Um, but what I do know is that the God of full-blown Christianity doesn't exist. That God doesn't exist. There's no God who rescued Jonah from the whale, this fish. There's no God that tested us in the Garden of Eden. Which, if He did so, and we were all going to be found guilty of sin, then the test itself is a sham. Because if we all were to have been in the garden and we all were have to sin, then there's just no way. I've given tests as a college instructor, and if I gave tests and everybody failed them, then it's really got to be the problem with me. So that kind of guy who tests us and cares what we think about him, to worship him, and to bow and to be in obedience and stuff like that. I don't see that kind of God existing. I mean, who says, "Glorify me, glorify me"? Look, if you're the best basketball star on the earth, you're not going to say, "Bow before me, say how great I am." I want to hear it. Come on, you didn't say it enough times. No, the greatest basketball star would just simply sit there and bask in the warmth and the adulation. So I don't see God having ever to require that, or wanting it, or demand it. So yeah,
Yeah. I had a question on in your introduction. I know that this is not your case, you're just introducing your case, but you say here that when it comes to the beginning of this universe, cosmologists today agree that quantum mechanics prevented there ever being a cosmic singularity. The universe was never in an infinitesimal point in space-time, and so there's no basis to assume that time began with the Big Bang. Now, are you saying that's kind of like universal among all the cosmologists? None of them
no,
believe in the Big
no,
Bang anymore?
no.
Or?
But probably the next guy I mentioned in the next sentence did.
Now, yeah, Hawking, yeah. Now, you're citing Hawking from a 1988 work, which is pretty early in his career too, where he changed his mind. So I didn't get a chance to go back and look at the citation on that, but I was wondering about that. Is your argument based that the consensus of cosmologists today that there was no singularity?
That's a really good point, because I argue that the highest
There
authority.
was a wave fluctuation because you talked about that a couple pages
Yeah.
earlier, right?
Yeah, when it comes to the consensus of scientists, that's the highest authority. That's on any given issue in any specific discipline. If the consensus of scientists is plate tectonics is real, then no non-scientist can buck that. No non-scientist can say no. We know other than from science. So the consensus of science in any given field of study is the highest authority, and outsiders cannot buck that consensus. Only scientists can, and not even one scientist all by himself, but the consensus itself has to change. Now, none of us all of us who are not scientists can't buck that. We have to wait for the
Models
consensus to change.
always change, but I know what you're saying. What you're saying is that a layperson is not in a position to be able to say that to try to change the model um, without having any consensus of the experts in the field. But those experts do change their consensus, and maybe they have here. But I've thought that the vast majority of cosmologists did believe in a singularity and a Big Bang. I know that initially the term Big Bang was a kind of a pejorative, but
Right, right. And when I said that, I didn't realize that it's not whether a scientist disagrees. It's whether the consensus agrees. And so I didn't realize that when I used that in the debate.
okay. Well,
At least,
I thought I might be missing
but at least
something.
one guy thought so.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't. And like I said, I'm not a cosmologist, so maybe the consensus has changed and I'm not aware of it. So,
And you have to give it time to develop.
mhm.
In the beginning stages of an area of research, you have to give that time.
Well, Daniel Ray is the guy on our staff that's done more work on this. Daniel, is there been a major shift in the thinking of cosmologists on whether there could have been a singularity?
No, but they are trying to hide a beginning behind quantum physics, and like Hawking was trying to postulate, um, um, he had to use imaginary time to create a limit to remove the beginning of this world. He implied an imaginary time into his theory. Roger Penrose and Sean Carroll have different variations of universes expanding and contracting. But they are working on trying to find a way around the Big Bang. But as far as I know, James, I think it's a
And
pretty
a lot
solid
of
nugget.
Christians are critical of Big Bang cosmology, but why would cosmologists that are not Christian be critical of that theory?
Uh, because like a lot of people said when it came out, it often looks an awful lot like Genesis. But as we talked about on our podcast with my friend Wayne and I, Big Bang cosmology, if you use it as a Christian, the problem is, as John pointed out, non-specialists using a scientific theory to validate the Bible is a little tricky, because if you want the beginning of the Big Bang Theory. But the question then remains, why are you rejecting everything else that comes after it? Because if you follow the chronology of Big Bang cosmology from the singularity to what we have today, it's a long, slow, gradual evolutionary process that does not mirror Genesis. And so the Big Bang, all it buys you is a beginning. But I'm not a big fan as a Christian of using Big Bang cosmology to prove the universe had a beginning, because there's so many other things in that model that are not akin to Genesis. And I know a lot of scientists. A friend of mine, Sarah, she and other people like Bill Craig and Hugh Ross think that there is continuity between the Big Bang cosmology and Genesis. But I don't think so, because Genesis was written 3,000 years ago. Big Bang cosmology is only 100 years old. So I don't, and I think for lay people, you got to be very careful not to get yourself caught in physics that you don't understand, myself included. And so I think it's too expensive. It's a high interest credit card to use Big Bang to validate Genesis, because it's just there's too many other complicated physics and things that are contrary to the way the narrative in Genesis begins.
The fourth day, for instance, is a big problem. I mean, there are other days, but the fourth day in Genesis 1, where the sun, moon, and stars are created after the earth. So this is a big one.
Yeah, and some people will say, like Hugh Ross will say, that was the stars and the sun and the moon appear on day four. They're not created. But that's a unique interpretation that I don't see a lot of evangelicals accepting. But I think that at the very beginning, I think when you take into consideration the entropy of the universe, which is as solid a fact as gravity, um, you have to have some way of explaining the origin of time, matter, and energy, and its subsequent decay. And that seems to me to at least point to a beginning, because Sean Carroll and Roger Penrose will say that stuff existed in a prior state before the beginning of our universe. But it's a complicated to try to justify matter and energy in some other state before it began in our universe. But I think if you're going to use science, I think the best argument for the beginning of a universe is the entropic decay of the universe. The usable energy is winding down,
You know,
and that seems.
that makes sense. It looks like it's a stronger of the arguments. I do remember that Victor Stenger,
Mhm.
a friend of mine who wrote a few books on this, he says that the concept of nothing is trouble, because what you have, he says, is a lot of forces taking place, even in what's called nothing, a nothing in the soup. And he does some math, which I have no clue about. Okay, I'm not going to tout his math, but in the appendix to one of his books, he shows how it's 60%. I know, 60% probable that if nothing exists, I mean, that there would be, from that soup of positive and negative forces, something. So I don't know how that, I can't, can you do the math? See, the whole thing, let's just stick with the Bible. I agree with what you said. There might be other kinds of reasons to think that the universe began and not, we don't, I can say this. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't know. What I can say is that the Genesis account in Genesis 1 and the creation account in Psalm 105, I think, and another place or two, um, is incoherent, meaningless, and pure myth. And then we can talk from there. I mean, that's what we're talking about are, tribal people who looked up at the stars and thought they saw this, and they thought they saw this. The very first religion, from what I understand, was a goddess worship. It was the moon. The very first religion, it was actually a feminine thing, I think. I've researched that. And patriarchy took over later on when it came to the Mesopotamian Valley. And it's a really fascinating history to realize how the authors of the Bible shut out the feminine. You can see feminine traces in the Bible itself. So, what I can say is the Bible is an unreliable guide to knowing the truth about God. And if you take that out as an unreliable guide, then all you have are a feeling. I mean, that's what I'm going to call it. You could call it a subjective, objective experience if you want, whatever that means. But it removes that. It just doesn't work to try to use that to support a religion. What do you say about that? I mean, I
I
appreciate
think.
your.
Oh, sure, sure. I think, John, the uniqueness of the Genesis narrative in the time in which it was written is it's monotheistic. Um, I mean, that's not entirely unique, but it is among the kinds of cosmogony narratives, the beginning of the universe. A lot of ancient Near Eastern narratives about gods have theogonies, that is, the origin of the gods themselves. And so, in one sense, the genitive, and I'm not saying this proves that Genesis is true, but the uniqueness of the Genesis narrative is that it's monotheistic, and it doesn't give names to the stars or the sun and the moon. And it's principally, you can look at it in one way, not the only way. It's a polemic against the polytheistic worship of celestial deities,
Well,
creation deities. So I think I'm not saying that this valid makes it true, John. I just said that in the context of Genesis, over and against other ancient Near Eastern narratives, the monotheistic denigration of the deities in the sky, that these are created things, they're not deities. And I think that lends a uniqueness that whether you think the Hebrews were ancient illiterate ancient Bronze Age peasants that didn't know anything about astronomy or not, the one thing that they're positing in their creation account is that God has always been, and the stuff that we see in the sky is created and not to be worshipped.
I beg to differ with you. I assume you've read the Bible because all it takes is to read the Bible
Yeah.
to find out that Moses wanted to see God, so he showed him his backside. That Adam and Eve saw God walking in the cool of the day, and that Abraham he worshipped the god Elyon. It says it right there. That had sacrifices. What was it? Well, I forget the context now, but Elyon, Elyon. And he was the God we can find out if we do some search into the Deuteronomy 28 passage. Elyon was the god of other gods, and then he gave them parts of the land on the earth and said, "You rule over that land." Genesis. I can't. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 8 and 9. You look that up, you look into the Hebrew, you see what the separate Septuagint said about that. And otherwise, you find those sorts of things even in Isaiah when God says, before I existed, then blah, but they will not. I'll tell you what. In I have a page at the secular web. Okay, my problem is my memory. Uh, on my secular web page, there's an article I wrote called um, "Does God Exist? A Definitive Answer." Does God exist? A definitive answer. You read that, and we'll do an email exchange.
How about this, John? Could we do this? We have a Facebook group, Friends of the Atheist and Christian Book Club,
Mhm.
and we post on there in between
Yeah,
meetings. Could
yeah,
you post that for us and give it where
yeah,
we can go
yeah.
and the club could take a look at it?
Yeah, and we even have a chaos god in Genesis. That would be to him. That's the very first verse or two where that the wind of God, usually translated spirit, uh, hovered over the waters. Now, the word used there is chaos, and it's the exact equivalent Akkadian word that is used for the chaos gods. Now, who are chaos gods? Now, I documented that on that article, but who are they? Well, they're the kind of gods in a polytheistic society that stir up trouble, and they come and go out of existence just like human beings came in and out of existence, not knowing how they came into existence or what was the first one or the last one would be. And they stirred up trouble. And then the creative gods came along and they decided to straighten out the chaos. Now, the chaos was an unformed earth. And in an unformed earth, someone had to form it because the chaos god was making havoc of it, most notably the watery chaos, because people were scared of the watery chaos whenever they went out sailing. They never knew whether they'd come back, and the wind whipped up, and everybody is scared. So these chaos gods had to be defeated. So I see Genesis 1 as the henotheistic God who said, I'm going to set this straight. And so one day after the other, he took on those gods just as surely as the gods in Moses' day were defeated by Yahweh one after the other. It was a war, and God had to fight Rahab, the chaos god, and he had to fight Leviathan and Behemoth. They were not necessarily chaos gods, but these were the gods who were keeping back order from the universe. James Barr, he wrote a book called uh, Fundamentalists in the Bible, a biblical scholar. He says this is undeniably the perspective of a certain segment in the Bible. That is, there were chaos gods named Rahab, mentioned in Isaiah, that God, Yahweh, had to fight in order to make a creation. You look that up, and in Isaiah, he makes he's Isaiah has God talking to other gods. Now, I find it odd, of course, in the first commandment that God says, "You will not have any other gods before me." Why, if they existed, then why didn't God just say, "Well, they don't exist"? But no, He says, "Don't have any gods before me." And then in Isaiah, it says in chapter 64 that God says, "He when I came to be blah blah blah, and no gods will come after me. There's a verse there. Look it up. Look seriously into it. I've quoted it in my essay at the Secular Web. It makes sense only if Yahweh is saying, even in a passage where this talked about monotheism, that he admits that coming and going out of existence is a possibility with even him. I know I blattered a lot, but it's really
No, that's
passionate
okay.
because you have to understand your Bible, and I think that's why you believe. I think that's why a lot of people believe, because they simply believe what the Bible says. Not you guys necessarily, but yes, you guys maybe. So maybe you have to take the Bible seriously. I mean, did Moses see God's backside or not? No, he didn't. Of course, he accommodated himself to people's thinking at the time simply because that's the best way to explain it. But that's not how they would have understood it at all. They would have understood a polytheistic God, a henotheistic God, a God who had sons and daughters in the book of Job, who were in heaven. In heaven, literally, they looked down, just as Isaiah was took up, because that's where God lived. These are fundamental categories that the ancients believed, and they aren't any different from other Mesopotamian cultures, and that's in the Bible. Now you can't continue to say that without doing that research. How's that?
Have you considered there's a passage in Psalm 82, 6 and 7, John,
Yes,
that use
that's
the
a passage with God.
Use the
What?
words Elohim.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
the quote is, "You said you are gods, or you are gods." And so there's two basic commentaries, two basic ways of looking at that. One of them, I think, is I don't know if it's the predominant view, but the use of Elohim in those passages, because in verse 7, whatever's going on in verse 6 of Psalm 82, verse 7 clears it up. Whatever you are, whoever these gods are, will die like men. So the likelihood of the interpretation of Elohim in 82:6 is probably something akin to magistrates or earthly judges who have set themselves up over and against the people as though they were divine beings themselves, but God is judging them and saying, "You will die like men." The other possibility is that these are demonic. If there's a plurality of gods, lowercase g, it may refer to demons and spirits and things like that. But in
There
terms
are
of the
gods. There are gods in the Old Testament. Chemosh, Chemosh. Chemosh. His he caused a great wrath to fall upon some of the tribes in Joshua's day that they were fighting, and so that uh, by allowing for a child sacrifice to do the work. The king of Meshish, I think, he sacrificed to Chemosh a child. And it says that therefore the Israelites were driven back. Now, the only way that could possibly be said that is if take it seriously, is to take it seriously. In the Bible, there was a god named Chemosh who honored the king of Meshach's sacrifice of a child, and that set a great wrath. Now look at the Hebrew word wrath there, ketzra, and it could be undeniable that sacrifice actually strode through the Israelites' back. Chemosh was actually ended up being Yahweh's brother, just like Baal was. So I mean, I'm throwing this stuff out. I can't tell you where the
No, that's
research
fine. I
is.
appreciate it. I think Chemosh, it's in First Kings. I think it was the abomination of Moab. So again, I think there may be. I mean, it was the Moabite god. I think it may have been John. I mean, I'm just from a Christian perspective.
I think
I
so.
think that Chemosh could have been something like a demon or a devil if it was real. That would be my best guess at that, because
Well,
you have the same contention with Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Elijah is mocking the prophets, and their God doesn't show up. And so there's a tension there, and like Paul going to Athens in Acts 17 and looking at all the gods in the Athenian marketplace and being grieved by them. The existence of the statues or the altars don't mean that there are actual physical gods. It could just be either demonic or just pure the pure imagination of men's minds.
Well, these
So
these are all attempts to explain away the text on its face. Take Moses, for instance, and Aaron. They threw down the magicians of their day threw down snakes, threw down their staffs and
right.
imitated Moses. And all of a sudden, Moses' snake, ate up theirs. But for the story to make sense at all, they actually threw their staffs down and they turned into snakes. Because if you
Sure,
take
they
that,
had power. They had
well,
power. I'm not denying that.
but what you're doing is that you're saying that there's demonic power versus other gods' power, and there are other
Yeah.
gods in the Bible. So,
And there's other
That- that-
possible explanations for that too. I went to it's closed now, but there used to be a magician supermarket in Dallas, and it was for professionals. I went there because I was curious about this. There's, one of the theories, and a lot of the commentaries bring it out. They're not sure if there was a demonic power involved with the snakes of the Pharaoh's magicians, or if they were using some kind of sleight of hand, pretending to have powers. So I asked the guy that ran the place. I said, I'd like to take a staff, like a walking stick, a big one. I throw it down, it becomes a snake. And he thought about it for a minute. He goes, "Yeah, I can do that." And I said, "Well, how would it work?" He said, "Well, I can't tell you unless you buy it." And he says, "But I would basically use the same." He said, "First of all, it can't be a poisonous snake. Secondly, I would use similar technology to the way the magician hits his wand, it becomes a bouquet of flowers. I know how that works. That's a collapsing wand. So that it's a spring that collapses back and leaves you with the flowers that were crushed up in the middle of it and pop out like a bouquet." And so he was able to take all the miracles that Moses's enemies, the Pharaoh's magicians, were able to duplicate, and he could sell it to me. But the thing it was like $5,000 or something. I said, "Well, never mind. Do you have anything for like less than $50?" So, but he went down every one of them and said, "Yes, I can sell you that. I can prepare that." And he does props for big name magicians and builds illusions for them. So could be that.
Magic of the kind you speak of can only be that which is performed in a scientific culture. Because in a scientific culture, a largely scientific culture, we're looking for causes. We're looking for, how did he make that rabbit appear out of nothing? Or how did that ball appear out of nothing? So our brains are looking for reasons why that happened, because we live in a scientific culture.
But
If you don't live in a scientific culture,
Well,
then
I question that, and here's why. Miracles were miraculous to the ancient world as well. Nobody thought that virgins conceived. Nobody thought that dead men came back alive. If they did think that, there would be no big deal to think of Jesus. Well, my uncle came back alive too, and a bunch of other people I know. Miracles,
like all the Old Testament saints that,
well, name them all.
well, I can't.
Well, there's only a handful in the whole biblical narrative of people coming back to life, and so there's less than a dozen.
I mean, at the day of Jesus, when he rose from the dead,
But
all the saints.
okay, you can count that then and get more. But what I'm saying is they weren't so superstitious that they believed that virgins gave birth all the time, that dead people came back all the time. It was a surprise and a shock to them as well to see it. Even though they weren't modern, we don't want to sell them short. So I see this from some of our atheist friends. It's just like dumb, goat herding, Iron Aged peasants. And then the next thing out of their mouth is they cleverly weave this lie into the narrative that 2,000 years later is still confusing people. They're pretty brilliant for these dumb Iron Age peasants, right?
Do you know the longest chapter I wrote in my entire list of books?
Yeah, which one?
The longest chapter I wrote is in Why I Became an Atheist, and it's called the superstitious world of the Bible. And in that, I documented such thing as the evil eye. Even Paul says, have you been stricken by the evil eye? What's the evil eye? Well, it's somebody that people don't like generally, who looks bad and I mean, like attire, like he could be a bad type of a person, and he looks you in the eye. That's the evil eye, and Paul apparently believed in that. Just look in that chapter, thousands of things that just are just unbelievable. You could increase your sheepfold if you just put certain branches on one back and
Okay, let me address that real quickly, okay?
Nothing scientific.
Because it was in your introduction here, and you said Jacob could increase his flock of sheep by using mandrakes.
That's it.
Okay, now let me say this:
I'm glad you-
when you were evangelical, did you not look this up in the commentaries?
I'm asking you whether you read the Bible. Now you're asking me whether I read the commentaries.
Yeah, and I won't be disappointed if you didn't.
I prefer the basic
You,
stuff.
you know, do you know the traditional understanding of Christianity of this passage?
Well, it's a miracle.
No. Jacob was superstitious and violating God in many areas. That's the theme of what's happening in this whole story. He tries to trick his brother out of a birthright. That's not saying we ought to do that. He was doing it. It was wrong. He connived with his mother. He tried to use witchcraft to try to make his flock out. His father-in-law beat out.
Is that what his name means, Jacob?
Yeah, it's what it means.
Yeah.
And God took him anyway, and the story is redeemed him out of that. And so these are you want to be careful when you're reading the Bible that sometimes it's prescriptive. This is what we ought to be doing, but a lot of times it's descriptive. It's telling you what they were doing as a lesson of an obvious. This is not the way you're supposed to live your life. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. So that's the traditional understanding that I'm familiar with in the commentaries of what he was doing and why.
And that's curious to me that upon hindsight, you can tell us what was meant to be taken literally and what was not to be taken literally. And every generation decides that, and you've decided that for maybe prior to you by generations or so. But at some point you say, no, that doesn't mean what it means on the face
But
of it.
maybe in the 1700s or the 1500s, this was the biblical plan of how you're supposed to get more sheep or something. But
I'm pretty sure it was used that way. But I just have to
I would be
document.
surprised on that. So yeah, you document it for me if you will. But
I don't know how to do that.
but again, there's a lot of things in the Bible that are descriptive, telling you what happened, and usually, okay, David and Solomon's wives and concubines. So well, we ought to do that. It's the biblical way. Let's go get 300 wives. Well, the Bible doesn't stop and say that was a terrible mistake. The whole chapters play out and show you how devastating that was on his family personally, on the nation of Israel as a whole. And so it's descriptive of what was happening. And to me, it shows some of the honesty of the Bible. It shows you the warts. It shows you the problems that these people were going through. It shows you their weaknesses and their blind sides. And nevertheless, God took these people and redeemed them and worked them and grew them out of that.
Do you see
John,
no?
John,
Do,
if I could, I think that there's two things that come into play in this. Some of the passages that we read, we're also getting observational language. We're getting the language from the observation of the people. For example, like when we say sunrise or sunset, we all know at this juncture that the sun's not really rising and setting, but from our perspective, from where we're observing, it appears as if it's setting or rising. And then you go back to the say, well, who we're just subjectively deciding what's what is subjective or not, or how are we going to if we're looking at the literary genre, or if it's like a metaphor or a simile, are we seeing like and as, as the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after me. There's a whole science that's not just for the Bible that deals with literary interpretation, and I think that we can be a lot more objective than to say that we're just willy-nilly deciding, what is what's going on in the passage, and trying to decide what is literal and what's figurative.
But
Are
here,
you-
that said, let me give John his due on this. If we were able to dig it up, I wouldn't be totally shocked if there was some Christian culture that was misinterpreting this and trying to figure out a way to get their flocks
Okay.
to mate. I'm not saying that's impossible interpretation.
But-
I'm just saying that that's not the one that I have seen in any of the commentaries.
Let me draw everyone in on this. Everybody's listening. How would you tell whether or not the sun, moon, and stars were just thrown out there, not very far away from the clouds? If you got it in a on a mountaintop, you could maybe touch it. The idea is that the sun, moon, and stars were planted in something called the firmament. Now, my trusted advisors here are the translators of the American Standard Bible, and they said that they've already entered the Iron Age. As the translators, the authors of Genesis 1, they've already entered into the Iron Age. So when they use that word, Rakim or something like that,
Rakia.
when they use that word, they were talking about a steel dome, and what you have to
Steel hadn't been invented yet.
iron. So you would picture the lights like recessed lighting in your kitchen right there. That's the kind of lights that they were pictured, and on top there's the stone, and that's where God sent down people to chastise us or communicate with us, or he wished Elisha back up. Now, you wouldn't be able to say otherwise until the rise of science. And if you can agree with me on that, you can agree with the other sorts of things that not the things I mentioned necessarily, but you have to say, we wouldn't know from the Bible that these observations weren't parts of creation. You just wouldn't.
But here's the problem, John, is they can't even get the most basic things right. Genesis was written in 1000 BC, 2000 years ago, not 3000, correct? The P and J. Here, we had Michael Strauss on the other day, works at CERN, brilliant PhD physicist. He thinks Moses wrote Genesis. Can you tell people, did Moses write Genesis?
You lost it?
Yeah, can you?
We missed you a little bit, Bill. Could you repeat?
Okay, nobody in scholarship thinks Moses wrote Genesis or anything else in the.
No.
Not even one.
John, tell him.
Bill said it. He's right. He's on the money.
But he's a layperson,
Thank
so
you.
he can't comment on this.
No, he's
John,
absolutely
can I
right.
make a comment about your Rakia and the stars and the moon just
Sure.
quickly? As I understand it, now you did point up correctly. The term firmament comes into the Latin Vulgate translation. That's what Jerome used. That was 16th century, I believe. Maybe it's I don't, my dates might be wrong, but anyway, I know Jerome introduced the idea of the firmament, and I know that you see the diagrams of the Hebrew cosmology that looks like you describe it pretty well, where the stars are affixed into something solid. And the reason the concept of solidity comes into play is not because of Genesis, but because how people interpreted Genesis. So when you look at Genesis today, if the term rakia is best understood as what we would understand as space. So God, I know you don't believe this, but as God separates the water from the water, that creates the rakia. The expanse is how some English translations render it. And so it's an empty space between water. And into the space, what we would call space today, he puts the sun, moon, and the stars. Now, over time, that developed into the idea that there's something solid holding the water back. But if you mirror this creation event with the Exodus event, where you have God separating the water from the water, there's nothing holding the water back except the power of God. And into the expanse between the waters, God puts the Israelites, whom he calls, likens to the stars in Genesis 15:5. So I think if we want to go back to just Bible, forget Jerome, forget what the Hebrews who came after thought, and we just go in Bible, Genesis 1, the only thing that we can derive from Genesis 1 that the rakia is empty space into which God put the material. So,
Well, even Christians don't believe that. Hugh Ross, I went there personally to his church.
yes,
And
Bill, some Christians do believe that.
yeah,
So
they believe what the scholarship says. Anyway, let's get to the book, okay? Because I think everybody wants to talk about the debate between him and David Woods.
Now, let me go ahead and introduce Bill better. Bill is the co-founder of the Atheist Christian Book Club, and Bill was the one that first told me about John Loftus. And Bill, John is one of your favorite authors, and you were talking about him. I was surprised we were able to get him for the first time on the book club, and this is, I think, again, your third or maybe even fourth time to be. I know you were in recently by Zoom, just as not just as a guest, not as an author. But anyway, Bill
You're
was the
right.
one who was your favorite fan.
He's been a huge influence on me and others. Even his critics, scholars say you need to read his books, even if you don't agree with him. They're the best books out there, in my opinion. The problem is you have Alex O'Connor, you have Apologia, you have all these young guns that are dominating YouTube. So, John, do you feel you've become irrelevant?
Well, you're right. The content creators are dominating things, and I don't begrudge them. I want everybody's voice to be heard. I want everybody to do what they can. I talked to one of them. They said, "Hey, I really appreciate your outsiders test for faith," and I mentioned it a lot of times in my program. He says, "I don't always give you credit. Is that okay?" I said, "Sure. I don't care if I get credit or not. So whether I do or not, it can be disappointing at times, but that's just the way it is."
Well, you have, your books are so good and, you just have so much to say. It's just sad that the world doesn't read books anymore. It's these YouTubers that are, like you said, taking over. But anyway, let's get to the debate. One thing I liked about David Wood, he talked about the Pauli exclusion principle, where these electrons have to inhabit certain orbits, like carbon, the first orbit's 2 electrons and then 4 electrons and so forth. And you have the principle of quantization where they don't fall into the nucleus. And what is really compelling in that debate to me was the Pauli exclusion principle, for one, exclusion principle, but the strong nuclear force, which holds the protons, neutrons, and quarks together, which make up the protons and neutrons. How in the world does that come about by chance? Plus, if it's what David said in the debate, if it's 2% stronger, you just get hydrogen, or you get all the elements beside the periodic table besides hydrogen. If it's 5% weaker, you just get the periodic table, but you don't get. So just a huge problem if you don't have this strong nuclear force fine-tuned to, like Michael Strauss told us the other week. So what do you think of that, John?
Well, I think that I'm comfortable not knowing. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I don't represent any consensus among scientists. I'm okay with not knowing. What I do, I only know what I know. And what I do know is the Bible is as I say, despite the objections that have been stated. It is actually a pre-scientific book that people took literally. And when God commanded the Israelites to, to sacrifice their children, they did it until later on in the text, then when Ezekiel said, "No, don't do it." So, and they fought, they lost a war, they were carried away into captivity for doing just like the nations did. So I know what I know, having studied the Bible, having studied philosophy, and I'll tell you this. I do have some advanced degrees, and I have studied the Bible, and I have tried to make sense to what the Bible has to say. I knew how to accommodate the text to my new views, like I hear being done. I knew I could read the Greek, I could read the Hebrew, here's the thing. I had to be sure, Bill, that I was right. Because if I wasn't sure that I was right, that the Bible is not a source of truth to God or anybody, any truth at all, that's historically verified. Maybe I said too much right there, but I had to know that the Bible is not from God. I had to know that Christianity is not from God, because if I got it wrong, I would go to hell. And people do not understand this. They just don't understand it when we leave the faith, because uh, I was afraid of going to hell. I had to get it right. And I was raised to believe. I went through college and seminary and Marquette University, because I was wanting to make it true. I was wanting to do everything that I hear people doing now in this chat to make you're going to do what you could do to make it true, and you're going to do everything you can to make it true, even if it means
Well, a
saying
good
things.
example of that is William Lane Craig, your mentor,
Yeah.
has pretty much given up on a literal Genesis. He says the Homo, habilis or whatever, uh, came 700,000 years ago. That's the first Adam and Eve. Totally reinterpreting. So, can you commend him? Oh, Homo heidelbergensis was the first Adam and Eve. Can you commend him for being
No,
open-minded
no, no.
and seeing the science?
No, I call that gerrymandering. People, the believers, they will do anything because their brain won't allow them to actually seriously entertain these ideas, and they will do everything to make it work. And I was one of them. I had to do everything I could to make it work. I went through the various theories of Genesis 1. I know I at one point, not now, but at one point, I knew them better than any of you know it today. The pros and cons, this, that, and the other. I could name them and blah, blah, blah. That was actually when I was like 1993 and four. So it's been a few years for me. I don't revisit stuff once I settled it in my mind. I settle it in my mind, I write it down, and I don't revisit it too often. That's why when I'm asked about
How were you able to overcome cognitive bias in your life?
Well, I had a passion for truth. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I don't know. I was just one of the lucky ones, because it is the truth that there's no truth in faith. And I can present the evidence, and I have. That's why my books are so good. The reason that's why they say my books are so good, because I actually meet their beliefs head on with their arguments. And some readers will even say, well, you know what? At every juncture along the way, I was thinking this, and then you answered. I was thinking this, and then you answered. I was thinking that, and you answered. So I have to have something with me that says I walked away. You can say, you might say I'm wrong, but you can't say I'm ignorant.
Well,
Well, here's one of your greatest
a lot of us would
accomplishments.
argue that the cognitive bias is an issue that every human faces, not just Christians.
Of course, but
Yeah.
it's just Christian's middle name. Uh, if your one of your greatest accomplishments is the outsider test of faith, which you didn't come up with, but you rigorized. And what it is that what determines our faith is where we are born and our peer group. What Christians will never get through their heads is if they were born in Saudi Arabia, they would be telling us how great the Quran is, how wonderful Muhammad is. I play pickleball with Muslims. So they did Quran or Ramadan, what do you call it, James? Ramadan just
Ramadan.
ended. So I said, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you poor Muslims. You can't eat or even drink water, and you're out here playing pickleball." Yeah, and they go, "Oh, we look forward to it. We love Ramadan." And I'm going, "What?" And we love our five prayers. So I'm looking at it from a Christian bias. And what you said was a zebra might as well get rid of his stripes. You cannot overcome your bias. And we've seen, like Sarah Salamander and stuff, PhD physicists that think Moses wrote Genesis. You cannot get through to them because do you understand? Well, you understand, you came up with it. How do you cut through that Christian bias?
Well, I'm telling you, for me, it was just simply wanting to know the truth. Now, um, I, some people have it, some people don't. Now, I'm not going to pat myself on the back for that.
I will.
I also had a terrible experience, and some things can just shock you into reality. And I had to know. I had to know, why did God abandon me at a certain time of my life? I mean, I don't think he abandoned me, and maybe I'm wrong to believe in him in the first place. So there's a
Okay,
lot of
last question, because I know other people want to talk about this debate. I thought David Woods won the debate hands down. What do you think?
As I said at the beginning of the program, when he asked me, how many have you won?
I've asked
I think you
myself
don't
the
have a
same
lot to say.
question.
It's just anyway. Thanks, John, for coming here. You've done so much for the cause, and
Thanks.
appreciate it.
I would say on the idea that because we were born in a culture, I would agree with you. It's more likely that you would do that, but we don't have to stay there. The whole book club. You look in the pictures is a testament against that. You were Christian, but you're not anymore. I was Mormon. I'm not anymore. Bill was
You're
Christian, he's
Exhibit
not
A.
anymore. Go through the whole list. I mean, it's like the book club. Just looking through there, most of the people aren't what they were born that are in
That's a
this room
great
right now.
point, John. James was Mormon, and that Mormonism is a big hurdle, and he overcame his bias.
So did Brady.
Yeah. So, can you? How does that? Is that a defeater to the outsider test of faith?
Well, I'm not trying to say the outsider test for faith is the be all end all of everything. What it can do is to force believers to re-examine their faith and look for solid evidence like never before. It's almost like, okay, now you're an adult now. You're no longer a teenager. You're an adult now. For the very first time in your life, examine your faith. And well, now how do we do this? Well, we do this based on evidence. You simply do. There's sufficient evidence, there's objective evidence, and there's testimony, and you just weigh the results.
Which means you're willing to look at the evidence.
Well, I mean, really, come what may,
Yeah,
type of thing.
right,
Come
right.
come what may.
There's a lot I like about the outsider test of faith, but in a previous book club, we kind of, and maybe I can circle back to that right now, but it seemed like that you yourself were struggling with the outsider test of faith because we did the book on the variations of Jesus mythicism. You remember this, and there were all these, which to me it was surprising that there was that variation because it was like all these, the myth theory that Jesus is a myth and didn't ever exist. I thought that was one theory, but it's actually a whole collection of possible ways that it could be. And interestingly, if any one chapter was true, it would force all the other chapters not to be true.
Not necessarily, but more or less, yes.
More or less. So, but
James.
the problem was you left out the one huge chapter, and that was that one possibility was that Jesus did exist, but that wasn't a possibility for you, and you would not read the book by Bart Ehrman. And I was saying, if you're gonna do,
I did read
if
it.
you're gonna pass, you told me you wouldn't. And I said, if you're gonna pass the outsider test of faith, you should be willing to look at not just at all the evidence, including Bart Ehrman, especially Bart being a fellow agnostic, atheist, who you quote and look up to, except in this one area, which he does believe and wrote a whole book. Jesus did exist.
I don't care if Jesus existed or not. It doesn't matter to me. He may have, he may not. No, that evidence is still out on that.
Well, if it's not important, why did you do the anthology?
Because I know this, that Jesus is in the Gospels didn't exist. For one important reason, you have 4 different accounts of his life, just depicting 4 different Jesuses. And you cannot, a composite view of a person, that composite view never existed. So from the very get-go, you have to say to yourself, the person depicted in any gospel didn't exist to the same degree as they are composite. Like John's gospel has Jesus, Son of God. Luke is a Jesus for all people, I think, if I remember right. And Matthew is a king. Mark is a servant. You say, well, we can blend all those, but
even most critics, John, though, are going to say that a historical Jesus did exist, and they take techniques or literary devices to be able to try to demythologize or to say, well, this part was later embellished. This part probably actually happened this way. The whole Jesus seminar works on that principle. So to say that none of this ever existed
Well,
I
no,
think that's
no,
not
don't get me wrong.
okay.
The Jesus we find in the Gospels never existed. The one who did miracles, the one who was raised from the dead, the one who was born of a virgin, the one who turned water into
Well, John,
wine. That guy
how
didn't
about the
exist.
Syrophoenician woman who says, "Hey Jesus, can you help me here?" And he goes, "Why should I give my pearls to the dogs?" The jerk
Exactly.
Jesus, doesn't the
The
jerk
jerk Jesus.
Wait,
doesn't
wait,
he
hold on. Bill, do you know the word that's translated dog there?
No,
Are you familiar with it at all?
I'm not a Greek scholar like you.
It's well, I'm not a Greek scholar either, and that's kind of a little
You
bit
know
of
more than I do. Yeah.
it's not he's not calling her it's not like you dog. It's more like pup. It's like a puppy. It's like a term of endearment in the Greek. He's not
Well,
being as big a jerk as maybe as it
he
sounds.
still seems to be kind of misogynistic. In other words, I think the
What
gospel.
was your point, Bill? Was
My
your point
point
that
is,
that
it's
is
painting a
probably authentic
realistic.
because it makes Jesus look bad?
My point is, it's painting a realistic picture of Jesus that he's just doesn't want to be bothered by, and he heals her. So what I'm saying is, by the criteria of embarrassment, you do have certain things. Or how about when his brothers say, "Hey, let's get this guy out of here. He's nuts." He couldn't do any great miracle. There's criteria of embarrassment where doesn't that lead to the authenticity of the account?
Because there were embarrassing things, doesn't that lend credibility that it was genuine, that it's not just made up because they included this information in there?
I I studied that all out, and I realized that the the results of the criterion of identity, criterion of embarrassment, criterion of authentic layers,
Multiple attestation.
most likely
Yeah.
those are all um, hard to navigate through. They're just really hard to navigate. Saying, okay, this one is good, this one's
It
bad.
seems a little bit arbitrary to me.
Right. And so what I do know, and we've talked about in the case against miracles, there's no evidence that, and we could focus on one miracle, just one. Did Mary give birth as a virgin? Was she a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus? If that happened, and it's obvious that we can't believe that because there's no evidence for it. Well, what's the evidence? Mary said so. Well, what other evidence do you have? Because she might have been covering up her pregnancy. Well, Joseph, he had a dream. Joseph's dream is evidence. Matthew chapter 1, he says he fell asleep, and in a dream, he dreamed that the angel said that, Mary was with child, and then he woke up. He fell asleep, he had a dream, and he woke up. There's no reason any reasonable person in the scientific world would accept Joseph's dream as evidence. Not Mary, not Joseph, nobody
Well,
else.
John, even the great Dale Allison says we can just forget the birth narratives, they're fiction. But what adds the credibility of the text to me is in Matthew, you have the resurrected Jesus. Matthew and Mark say, go to Galilee. And Luke specifically says, stay there in Jerusalem. So you have contradictory accounts.
Yeah,
And we asked
contradictory.
Dale Allison, he said, probably the Galilee account's more primitive and more. So, do you see if they're trying to collude and make this story up, why would they have such contradictory accounts?
Well, here's a theory that I agree with. That's Mark created a story. Probably could have been based on Paul's preaching. I think that's been espoused before, and then he didn't have a room for a resurrection. I mean, he says he got resurrected, but you had to tack on some text of Matthew or Mark that really wasn't there. Matthew expanded on it and wrote some pretty crazy stuff in his, like the Old Testament saints, walking around Jerusalem, the soldiers that guarded the tomb, even though they knew that if they told Pilate that they would be derelict of duty to allow Jesus to escape. And Matthew added the virgin birth story, to which Luke decided that no, I'm going to have to take out what Matthew said about Hosea and Isaiah. They said they
Yeah, he
predict.
redacts it. Yeah.
You got always said no, because in the first two verses or so of first four verses of Luke. He says, I've done some investigation and I'm going to put it down basically historically accurate. And he cuts out, unbelievably, the quote about Isaiah that Jesus was going to be born of a virgin, cuts out Hosea, my people came from Isaiah, my people came from the Hebrews, and he also cuts out on the soldier story because it's unbelievable. And he cuts out the Old Testament saint story, and he reduces the Beatitudes, and he edits the genealogies. Now, why would he edit the genealogies? Because they don't make sense. Matthew's apparently came through the male side of things. So Luke wrote it coming through the female side, but neither of them works because what only works is if Joseph or Mary were the father or the mother of the child. Otherwise, a new creation was made, nothing human at all.
Yeah, it's just fiction. But here's the thing. In the end of Matthew is my last point, because I know people want to talk about your debate, and I want to hear what they have to say.
I don't.
Last point is we can't win them all. You have the resurrected Jesus at the end of Matthew appearing before the disciples. Some doubt it. Now, why in the world would you say that? If you're trying not to be.
The end of Matthew, it says some doubted. They said this, but some doubted.
Well, doesn't that add to the verisimilitude of the account?
Well, I know I don't want to be like a theist to answer you, but the theist would say that they put it in there to make it seem more credible. Some doubted. Well, see, we're being honest with the facts.
Clever.
Anyway, thanks. I know people want to ask about your debate. Go ahead, guys.
He's gone. I'm going to miss you, Bill.
I know Phil had a couple of comments earlier, but I didn't know if that was something that he wanted to share with the whole club or just in the comments. Phil, did you have something for us?
I was just making random comments just off the top of my head, just because that's just what I do. I'm kind of a rambler, you know. I mean, I hear things, I make comments on them, and then I walk away and talk and think about something else. So, you know, I don't even remember what all the comments are, that I made.
As a reminder, we want to keep, and I don't see, I think everything's great that I'm looking at right now, but in the past book clubs, we have had a few snarky remarks in the comments, and we want to be respectful throughout the whole club. That would even include in the comment section. Phil, I know that you have an opportunity. I got an email that you are taking steps to go into full-time ministry. And could you just take just a second and tell the rest of the club about that?
Yeah, I am going to be. Well, I have come on board with Free Thinking Ministries, so I am officially now in full-time ministry, and that will include being an apologist, a philosopher of religion. And we'll be dealing with theological issues, cultural issues, and outreach, evangelism, kind of the whole 9 yards. And this is something that's brand new for me. I have been a professional earning a salary all my life, and now God has thrown me into full-time ministry, and I was tempted to write a kind of a support letter and an announcement about that started with the introduction. As incontrovertible proof that I have finally lost my mind, I've decided to go into full-time ministry.
Well, welcome to the world of poverty.
Yeah, I've decided to leave that out because I didn't know if everybody would have that kind of sense of humor. But yeah, that's where I am now, and I'm in the process of raising support, and hopefully within a few months, maybe 6 months or so, I'll be fully funded. But in the meantime, I've begun to do the work, and I have integrated my podcast into the Free Thinking Ministries channel, and so that's a big step forward. I've just published a couple of articles on the Free Thinking Ministries website, but I've been an author for that website in the past as well. So but yeah, that's what I'm doing. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I don't want to make this all about me, but
No,
I
this is good. If you could do this for us, though, there would be some of us that would like to follow along on that journey with you a little bit. You might have a newsletter or an email list or something. If you could do two things for me, just as for those who might want to are interested, if you'll put it in the text here in the comments of how they could follow along with you, and also if you would do that later on our Friends of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, and that way the whole club can kind of the ones who want to can kind of follow along, see what you're doing.
yeah,
Hey, John.
I put my email address in there,
Yeah.
and if anyone is interested in receiving my newsletter, you can email me and request to be put on that list, and I will send you the April newsletter that I just sent out a few days ago, and then it has a lot of, well, it has some information on it about what's going on, what I've been doing, and what's coming ahead. And if anybody's interested in that, then that'd be great. And then I have in my newsletter I have a link to where they can go to the Free Thinking Ministries website to if they want to join me in financial support, that's great. But if not, then prayer support and prayer partnership is always, is obviously something that's important. It's just as important as the financial aspect of it, So yeah, but I appreciate you giving the opportunity to share that. I'm pretty excited about it, so.
Well, I haven't looked into it. I really didn't have time carefully to study what you'd sent, but it triggered something in me that I do want to find out what's going on and what that ministry is all about. And it sounds like the kind of thing that a lot of us like apologetics, and
Yeah.
I'd like to follow you.
The founder of Free Thinking Ministries is Dr. Tim Stratton, and he's kind of a disciple of William Lane Craig, and if you go to the freethinkingministries.com website, that's the exact website, freethinkingministries.com. The banner, the top banner is a video from Tim who introduces the ministry and what we're all about and what we do and so on. And so
I was able to watch one of the podcasts that when you were on with him, I think on his show, I believe a couple of months back. It was interesting.
Okay. Yeah, and just a few days ago we did a live podcast where Tim Stratton and Josh Klein introduced me as a new member of the Free Thinking Ministries team, and then we dealt with some Calvinist tweets in that, which was kind of a fun episode, so.
And I saw Ken. I didn't get a chance to read it, but you had a lengthy explanation on the Old Testament God of chaos, and the two different. I think you had said there were two basic interpretations over what that was about. Ken, did you want to elaborate or just leave it in the text?
I don't need to say much about it. That's just the AI summary. Just came up. I mean, there's shows the general interpretations, but I guess my general thought is that if you are inclined to want to interpret the text in a certain way, you will find a way to do that. And if you want to interpret it another way, you'll find a way to do that. I mean, that's just human nature. So, I mean, the trick is, what was it originally really trying to say? And I think those of us who are of the bent that the Bible is not divinely inspired tend to want to look at it more at face value, what it appears to actually say.
Can I comment on that real quick, Ken?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the way that I view it is that our job as biblical scholars is to be committed to overcoming our bias. And so if the Bible is divinely inspired, then that gives us even a greater motivation to overcome our bias and to approach it objectively and try to get down to what the original authors really meant and really wrote. So I think just appealing to human nature is only half the story. The rest of the story is overcoming our human nature and and being disciplined in our study of the scriptures. So, so I
Well,
don't
you
know
know,
if that scratches where you itch, but
I guess I recently listened to a debate, or not a debate, but a discussion between Alex O'Connor and I forget his name, a Mormon apologist. And I was very struck with how adept the guy was at, defending the indefensible, like, the Book of Abraham and things like
Mhm.
that generally trip up most Mormon apologists, and lead to a lot of defections of the Mormon faith. But it just strikes me how, and I don't think the guy is intentionally being trying to be deceitful or misrepresent the situation. I really think he thinks he's doing the right thing, and he's very adept at it. I wouldn't mind going out to and having a, go bowling with him, or he's a fine, upstanding person. Respect for the guy, but I just don't understand how he can adopt a position like that and interpret things in ways that to me seem on the surface indefensible. I'm just saying that nobody thinks that they're that person who's defending the indefensible. Everybody thinks they're the one defending the truth, right? But how do we get ourselves out of that?
You're absolutely right, Ken. And I've had the same, one of the main reasons I left the Mormon church was the Book of Abraham. And to see, I'm pretty sure I watched part of that same video. And there's another one, which is less impressive, but it's some younger guys that have this radio show, a podcast where they're defending the Book of Abraham and trying to bring each apologist on to talk about it. And you can see the holes in their argument, but there's a few times when it stings where I say, well, I have been tempted to do something very similar in my own defense. And so I think it helps me to be able to say, um, we forget our job I forget my job as an apologist is to get to the truth. And sometimes I think, well, that's after I first of all defend what I already believe, and then we'll get to true stuff later or something. And I think, well, maybe that does go back to human nature. It's certainly something that I think all of us. I know I have struggled with that, and
Yeah,
so I can learn. I can
we
learn
all
from
should
that. This is
struggle.
what not to do. I don't want to, in defending the Bible, I don't want to make those kind of category errors and stuff.
Yeah, we all should be um, circumspect and realize how fallible we are. I mean, all of us. I mean, the key there, like I said, is none of us thinks we're that person. None of us thinks we're the person that's defending the indefensible. No
Yes.
exception. We
Yeah,
all we all
I saw that same interview, Ken, and I'm just like you. I was like, wow, this is. I mean, I've never seen anything quite like this before, but I think for me, and I agree with your statement too about wanting to uh, try to twist the interpretation to be whatever we want it to be, and you can certainly do that. And I think it just goes right back to the importance of being on a sound hermeneutical um, structure, and then trying to follow that, and really kind of going back into John's work, trying to keep your bias at the door, and really let the truth take you. And if you go through the process, I think a lot of times you can actually get to where you need to be, but sometimes it may force you to move off of the spot that you've been on for many years, or maybe even your whole life.
Do we have anybody that's lined up that has a question or comment? When's your next debate going to be, John?
I don't know. I'm probably not going to do them.
Are you retired or just tired?
I'm both. James Sturba wrote a really good rebuttal, and he's invited me to his second symposium called "Morality Without God, Ethics Without God." And so he wrote a paper, and he asked me to respond, and I wrote a pretty good essay on it, and it's going to be published in his next compendium. So that's pretty cool. I think it's pretty um, noteworthy to be able to write something for something like him. So I put together about 15,000 words because I didn't want to make sure I left anything out. But I think I did a good job of defending the idea that you can have a morality without God. So
Hmm.
Hey, John,
Objective or subjective?
I wanted to ask you about another debate
Objective.
With Randall Rouser. This was
Yeah.
one of the worst debates I've ever seen. The commentator,
Not John's part, though, right?
no, John did great. The commentator, and Randall didn't do bad either, but I thought you were a little better than Randall. The commentator thought he was a debater. He just kept on and on. It's like you're not part of the debate. You're supposed to be, which Brady does so good, a neutral observer, like a referee. How did you feel about that, John?
I've been in those situations before where I feel ganged up on. And one thing, James doesn't make me feel that way. I mean, he gives good comments, but I've been in those situations where there was more than one debater on the other side simply because of the moderator, and you can't really do much. I called Justin Briery. You had mentioned him earlier. He had Ronald Rouser and I on there, and he took Randall's side. It was an earlier thing. I don't know which one you're referring to, and I complained about it online. I said that you know that he didn't ask fair questions. He didn't ask even questions, and he didn't like that. So he hadn't had me on since. I guess I should have thought about that before I said
Well, speaking of Randall Rouser, he's a very sophisticated apologist. He has an answer for everything. So, are you familiar with ideological immunity? In other words, ideological immunity, that you are immune to argument because you know these arguments so well. Someone like William Lane Craig, you know all the answers. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so. I know a lot of them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you get through to them? How do you get through to a Randall Rouser?
You don't.
Okay.
No more than you, and this is a compliment, no more than you can get through to Phil Blair.
Or especially in one of your books, you write about Calvinism, the horrible, what's the title of the chapter? The horrible world of
For Phil, you're talking
Calvinism.
about Phil?
John's book.
Oh, John, about anti-Calvinist chapter.
Oh yeah, I have a chapter on to see the. I really at the age of 70, I've lost some brain cells. I swear, in this case, I have to take memory pills at night. But Calvinism is a lying, no good, bad Calvinistic God, something like that. Yeah, I forget the name of the title. I've written so many chapters, I have a hard time.
Yeah, but here's the
So
thing
all
with
gods are
Calvinism.
bad, but the Calvinist one is really, really bad, right?
I brought it out for special, tagging.
You said,
Oh,
John,
yeah, it'll get the tags, right?
That's actually getting in the middle of a sectarian debate.
Yes.
Whether Calvinists or non-Calvinists are right. And I attack the Calvinists, not the non-Calvinists.
Yes.
what
Divide
I
your
thought you said, which was so profound, is when you have an answer for everything, which Calvinists do. How about the problem equal? Oh, God's sovereign. How about free? Oh, God's sovereign. They have this smug arrogance. If you've ever dealt with them, which I have for years. So you said people that have an answer for everything, thanks, Phil, answers nothing. You want to comment on that?
Oh, absolutely. And I know
You have
that.
an answer for that?
And I know that. No,
John?
Calvinism is itself an apologetic. That's what I say in the chapter. It is its own apologetic because it's nailed down all the loose ends. So long as you accept the loose ends, and so long as you accept that they've been nailed down, and so in itself, it's almost impenetrable from the outside perspective. From the outside,
There's a lot of explanatory content there. If you buy the premises, it seems to be internally pretty consistent.
and that's all they need to do to have a verifiable faith. But see, that doesn't say anything about whether there's any evidence for it, and that's why I hammer home on evidence all the time. And Phil gave me some criteria about an extraordinary claim, and I said, Phil, I've given you all the alternatives. And he says, well, let's talk about the criteria. Which criteria do you endorse? And I don't really want to get into that criteria of what counts for an extraordinary claim. All I need to do is present all of the alternatives and ask him, well, what else are we referring to that would count other than
Well,
eyewitness testimony and evidence and
but I would argue
dreams
that
wouldn't count.
saying that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is itself an extraordinary claim, and you cannot hold to it without giving me the extraordinary evidence first.
That's a sophism.
That's my point.
That's a
That was my
plat-
point
that's a
exactly.
platitude.
So what I see is anytime I try to present some evidence of any kind, I'm not the judge or the jury on that. I've been told that's not evidence at all. That's poor evidence and stuff like. Well, how do you quantify extraordinary or ordinary? Which evidence is ordinary, and when does it cross the threshold into extraordinary?
Well,
It's adjectives. It's not facts.
secondhand testimony doesn't count. A dream doesn't count. A vision doesn't count. Not if you're going to present objective evidence. And I went through the various lists of things that don't count to establish an extraordinary claim, like say the Virgin Mary, and said no. Phil, either give me what does count, or stop claiming that I need to provide anything in addition to merely say what doesn't count.
So, John, are you aware that I wrote a 400-page book on Calvinism?
No. No.
A critique of
My guess is you would enjoy it.
Okay.
And if you're interested, I'd be willing to send you a free copy. I would even sign it and send it to you.
All right,
But
who's listening?
Maybe you could even make it into one of his anthologies that you could be a chapter in one of his upcoming anthologies.
I don't know if I'm doing it anymore.
yeah, well, John and I would be fast friends when it comes to Calvinism. We could talk about that until the cows come home, and I don't think we would ever run out of anything to talk about, and we would enjoy that to the hilt so much.
Who is your target audience in your book?
I have a dual
The living
target
Calvinists.
I
audience.
have-
Backslidden Calvinists.
I have a dual target audience.
Pastors, people online, all of the above.
Actually, there's a range of people. I tried to write the book in such a way that it would be understandable and accessible to the layman, but I also wanted to make it rigorous enough that the Bible scholar would be able to sink his teeth into it as well. But are you familiar with Leighton Flowers?
Vaguely, I've heard the phrase. That's about it.
Okay. Well, he was out in Colorado last year, and he and I came up to the ranch I'm living on, and we had ribeyes for dinner. And on the way up, he said, "Phil, I want to tell you something that I think might make you happy." He said, "I have a pastor friend who gave your book on Calvinism to another pastor friend, and that pastor rejected Calvinism as a result of reading your book."
Very good.
And-
Good job.
And I thought,
Success.
man, that made the 2 years that I spent writing it all worthwhile, all
Nice.
absolutely worthwhile. But we could have a discussion on the whole idea of extraordinary evidence. I don't think we could even scratch the surface if we were to try to do that right now. But I think it would be worth the discussion, and I think it would be worth pursuing. But if you're interested, I don't know if that's something that trips your trigger anymore these days or not.
Not much gets my interest unless it's a new topic. Like when James Sturba says write something about morality and God. I have a chapter in why I became an atheist about God and morality, but I hadn't revisited it since 2010 or so. So I thought, well, let's do it. And I was able to plagiarize from some of my earlier work, but not much of it because I hadn't written much of it. And then I put that together. I'm really excited to see the result, what they might say. So,
But you're making a case that there is an objective
it's
basis on morality,
if
not subjective.
if objective means something that is to be taken seriously by all people, then yes, it's subjective. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But this is the source simply how people feel about it, or is it
Well, I think
more objective than that?
morality. Let's see if I can rehearse some of that. Morality among human beings is different than morality among chimpanzees and dolphins and elephants. But there is some kind of morality in the pre-human world, which led up to us as moral agents ourselves. So we already had a morality before we existed. And the morality that we had is different because we have more brain matter, and our tribal connections are much more important in that like a baby needs a mom to take care of them for like 20 years so they can get out on their own. So we have much closer ties than other animals, because other animals you can just spit them out and they're running while they just afterwards. So you have closer ties, which also demands more tribal connections. Tribes that stay together are tribes that care for each other. And all we've done since then is expand the notion of who is in our tribe. Now, what has happened in the global world is it's a global world. And we care more and more for more and more people because we're aware of their existence. Now, there's still, lots of wars, and religion separates us. But
Is culture getting better or worse?
I don't care. I mean, I'd hope to think it's better. I mean, you'd have to add that up. You'd have to like see what's going on over here and what's going on over here. But in one sense, as we become more aware of people on the other side of the globe who are starving, we care, and we care. We just simply do. Those of us who are empathetic and caring individuals do, and we are trained to be empathetic and caring because we were raised in a tribe. The first tribe was a family, and if your mom and dad didn't take care of you, you would die. See, so there is a morality. It starts there, and then what I do unique to that argument is I bring in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's I think six levels to that. The basic level is your physiological needs. You need water, you need air to breathe, you need food, and without them, you're nobody. Actually, unbelievably, at the base of that is also your sexual needs. I found that interesting. But you have needs that are basic, and then above those needs, you have social relationships. Above those needs, you have intellectual needs, and above that, you have you trace that up, and you have needs. Okay, so and now the only way I can achieve those needs, the needs that I have, basic ones and above, is to depend on others. I mean, there's certain like intellectual needs, or like you have needs to be appreciated. And if you do something good, like you're doing something good here, for people, it makes you feel needed and wanted. You need to be needed. You need to be appreciated. So here you do this. So the more we have people to appreciate us, the more we can satisfy those higher levels of needs. Which means the tribal morality of the earth is getting, as it gets bigger, among empathetic people, means we care more and more for people. And if you have that kind of care, then it changes who we are as we evolve, something like that.
And so that may be a debate or a book in the future.
Well, it's in my article. It's going to come out. It said July. You look it up. James Sturba. He's put together a really good argument, and I commented on it. I think what I've done, I'm more tuned in on that argument. You can tell because it's recent.
Yeah.
But
Hey, John,
there's a morality, and it's objective in serious ways.
could you provide extraordinary evidence for the reason that Maslow is the foundation of your moral system? That's an extraordinary claim that guy would be the foundation of your moral framework. Can you provide evidence as to why he and not somebody else would be the guy you go to?
Was there somebody else? Oh, okay. He's only correct insofar as he's correct. Okay. So if you dispute his level, our hierarchy of needs, then do it. I mean, if you can do that, then do it, and then we'll devise other needs or, that we have.
Reorder them, maybe.
We'll reorder them. But he's done the work. It seems as though what he says is true. Prove him wrong, and then we'll just revise it. But we need other people to meet those higher needs. We need other people to get a drink of water if it's in some certain cases, So we need so since you need people, you don't you gain by giving. You quickly learn that you gain by giving, and so there's a mutual giving and receiving along those hierarchy of needs, and it's not religious based, and it's just human based because we are a different species and
So you
subjective.
do you believe, John, that the needs themselves are what engender compassion? Or is it, because it seems like what needs to happen is, okay, we have these needs, and I'm fine with his hierarchy in terms of like the stuff that is basic to our existence. But it seems like there's something missing there in terms of like Maslow being able to compel other people to meet the needs of other people. So it
Yeah.
seems like what's the plug-in that makes somebody go, oh, there's a need over here, and I should be the one to take care of it? Where's that
Well,
should come from?
there is none. What happens is what happens when you're around people who care for you, and you tend to care for them. And if you're hungry, they feed you, and you see them starving, you feed them. That's how it works. Now, some people don't do that. Okay, to the degree that you want to cut yourself off of society, you will cut yourself off society. And when you do, you will be all by yourself, and you'll tend to have a short life. You might end up in jail. You might commit suicide. These are the people who, in one way, don't count. I mean, they don't count in the sense that when it comes to describing the morals of humanity, they don't count. The sociopaths and the psychopaths don't count because they don't care. They just simply don't care. One's because of brain problems, the other one just because of socializable problems. So these people, they can't dispute an ethical theory because they have rejected ethics. Okay, so with tossing them aside, not literally, but just as hypothetically, when we talk about the question before us, it just is what happens. You can't be put in an environment where people's needs, real needs, are being met, that you aren't going to join in. And although you can't explain people who don't join in, you can't explain people who are cheaters from within. Nobody has to explain everything, but you can explain what you can explain and no more. That's it.
On the extraordinary claims, circle back around to that a little bit. I don't remember if we talked. We may have talked about this. I know the book club, it's come up before, but I don't think it was when we were doing your book, the case against miracles. Maybe we did, but one of the frustrations I've had with the extraordinary claims is talking to people who deny the moon landing. And they say, well, they don't believe that we ever landed on the moon because there's no evidence for it. I said, well, there's tons of evidence. We've got photographs, we've got movies. Well, that's not extraordinary evidence. Well, I mean, it's very frustrating because, well, what about NASA? Well, that's part of the conspiracy, you see. They're in on it too. And it's all done in a soundstage, and it's like they get to control the narrative of what is evidence, what is ordinary, what is extraordinary, and they just knock down anything I can throw out there. That's not extraordinary.
These are general claims: ordinary, extraordinary, and miraculous. Although miraculous is all by itself, I argue in my book, it must be an event that could not take place by mere nature as it moves,
Right, and we would add to that. Most Christians would also throw in that it implies an act of God, not just some kind of.
I would agree. Yeah,
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
right.
So that's a separate category. But when it comes to the difference between extraordinary and ordinary, if you're around atomic explosions or bombs, this is ordinary. So you can have a certain subjective perspective there. But things that don't happen very often I mean, rarely, like a hole-in-one golf, 2 in a row, 3 in a row, 4 in a row, 5 in a row.
Improbable is different.
I use my example as sinking 18 consecutive hole-in-ones in a row on a par three golf course. I say par three because of the regulations is too far to get on the green on the first time. So par three, and so who's done that? Well, no one's done that. So if someone comes along, one person says, "I have testimony that I did it," you wouldn't believe it because that's an extra that kind of thing. So what you'd have to do is you have to like list them. I mean, you can't really maybe come up with principles that define what an extraordinary claim is versus an ordinary claim, but you can certainly know them when you see them, like that. Now, what I do is I take that 18 hole in one scenario, which is a purely natural claim, and I say, now what happens if someone were to claim that, but also claim that he was whisked into the air and landed on the second tee after making a hole in one on the first tee, and then he whisked in the air and third, fourth, fifth, flew. Let's say flew. Sorry. So that is a miracle. Why? Because we don't see people fly. So that would be the differentiation.
Improbable moves to miracle status at that point.
I think so. Yeah, sure. I mean, now it can, like there's 7 billion people on the planet, so you would expect that rare occurrences will take place. I mean, you expect that we've all experienced them every day. We just don't really see them. I mean, what are the chances that you and I'd be sitting here,
Daniel has tried to counter with actually having recently interviewed a moonwalker, Charlie Duke. And that's not extraordinary evidence either, because that was 50 years ago and his memory's probably failed by now.
Well, you can pick apart. You can question specific examples, but it would seem to me that the examples that we see in the Bible, my focus, the things we see of fire coming down from the sky, not lightning, fire, virgin giving birth, blah blah blah. Those specific examples are clearly extraordinary claims.
By the way,
John, would you think that? Would you
the
think,
North
John,
Korean
that
dictator did 18 holes in one? Go ahead, Daniel.
John, would you think so? There was like 12 men walked on the moon. The first one would be, maybe we could say it was extraordinary. And then the last one, nobody even watched it. Apollo 17. Well, some people did, but
Well, I mean, like,
would you so like to somebody in the first century, let's put this back in Jesus's day, told the apostles that 12 men would walk on the moon, what would they say?
pardon my French, but they might say bullshit.
So we would give them, but think about the evidence that we have for the moon landings. It's basic stuff: newspaper, eyewitness accounts, TV, and 400,000 other people who worked at NASA. So this is common stuff, right? This is how we know stuff, through eyewitnesses and newspapers and reporting and writing and books and TV and all that stuff.
Now for the gotcha moment, right? Now for the gotcha moment.
No, because
Yeah.
even TV to the first century people would have been extraordinary,
Right.
but it's not extraordinary to us that we can do this right now.
Right.
So I think the inverse is true for the resurrection. They're looking at our moon landing going, you guys are absolutely out of your mind. And we're looking back at the resurrection going, no, you guys were out of your mind. But I think it's, so it seems to me there's too much subjectivity in how you define extraordinary, especially when you're looking at the historical context of our time and their time. There's kind of an anachronism that
Okay.
we're applying back into the first century. It's not a gotcha. It was just kind of what I was.
No, that's a good gotcha. I mean, that's a good question because
That was my gotcha.
okay, good, Phil. That's exactly the problem I see it from your perspective. I mean, but I think a lot has happened since first century and now. Science, not just science like they had it in Aristotle's day and Ptolemaic studies and things. Galileo brought something different. Sir Isaac Newton. What we had now is we had scientific explanations for things. We could investigate things under the microscope, the telescope, and we've been able to build cruise ships, which I just went on. I couldn't believe it. I was sitting on a cruise ship, and I don't know how deep that water was, but that's very deep. And here we are, like tons and tons of people here and machinery on this boat floating.
I
So
hope you have some evidence.
I did. I survived. Now, I may not present you the evidence because all I'm doing is telling you a story, you see. I get the conundrums. I get them. But bottom line, there's a bottom line there, and that is this is an extremely ordinary event from a scientific perspective. And that's also probably, you could say, a parochial one. But science has proven itself effectively to explain things, build cruise ships and rocket ships to the moon. And so science is basically the bedrock. And actually, without it, you couldn't even have a miracle. This is really a fascinating thing. I'm off the topic, but unless you had the regular, orderly,
It's not off the. That's not off the topic. That's a good
No,
point.
I totally agree, John. Yeah, you can't.
Yeah.
You got to have an understanding of
Right,
what is
right,
common
right,
to have a comparison to something that is uncommon. So
right.
even though we know the laws of science to the extent that the first century people didn't know, it would still be extraordinary to them. And I think we're back to the same bucket. But I think the greater miracle here, John, is the regularity and the knowability of the universe itself. That we can, why is this intelligible to us, and why is it so predictably regular that we can launch men and rockets to a moon because we know the orbit of the moon. We can calculate to an nth degree. So
Fascinating.
that's pretty extraordinary, I think, too. But you're right. I totally agree with you that we need a regularity in nature to know when the supernature breaks in. So
So
yeah.
my criteria is science. It's basically that's why a miracle would have to be something that cannot occur merely by scientific means, natural means. A
Mhm.
miracle, by definition, must be one that cannot be explained from our perspective. And that leaves a whole lot of room for discussion. I get that. But I think that that basic admission will undercut anything that you know about the past as found in the Bible. And that's my claim, and that's to be determined by you and you alone.
John, if a resurrection had happened 2,000 years ago, and it people did believe it, and they thought they saw something, okay, and they wanted to let the world know that they thought it was important. If it really did happen, what kind of evidence would you expect to see 2,000 years later?
I've written a lot about that. If you go to my blog, it's called What Would Convince Me? And actually, I think I've got I gathered together 5 different authors to write what would convince them. I saved my list for last. That's one. You can look at that. Us? What would convince us? I think that would be enough to get there. And but I also have done it recently. I say this, okay, so if the atonement of Jesus on the cross saved sinners in the past, that's 2,000 years, 4,000 years, 17,000 years, a million years, I know that's not possible. But if uh, Jesus' death on the cross saved people in the past, then he could have come in 2020 and dying on the cross for the sins of the world then, not there in a scientific world, and then he would still be able, his death would still atone for the sins. All we have to do is add 20 centuries to that. So he could come. I know your brain, I know how it works. No, that's not possible. I'll wait for your possibilities
Well,
later.
no, you're talking about hypotheticals.
Right.
So yeah, you can
Right.
have that conversation.
We have a
I'm
God.
not, I'm not going to counter it.
Right. Okay. You have a God who could do that. I mean, you say, well, maybe God couldn't do that, and then the discussion's over. But God could have done it that way, could have orchestrated history whatsoever. So he would arrive during the scientific era, and you'd have people with cell phones, making the raising.
So if he waited till 1969, everybody would believe it, like do the moon landing.
Well, I mean, I suggest 2020 because it's later on in life. But it seems like now, to see what happens now. The the Virgin Mary birth could be documented by cameras in the OBGYN. And
HIPAA laws, they're never going to allow that.
if you're talking
Y
about
chromosome analysis would be good in that regard.
What's that?
Some Y chromosome DNA analysis would be interesting.
That would be fascinating, wouldn't it?
So in that case, if you want a scenario where it would work, now it would never have worked in the past. The miracles that I'm claiming need evidence that would never be there.
Hey, John,
So that means God could have done something different.
in relation to what you're talking about, I want to mention something because we're on the extraordinary evidence. A lot of you said this a couple of times about eyewitness testimony, right? That it, as in terms of evidence, secondhand eyewitness testimony does not count, right?
But let's just remind ourselves what that is. That's what we hear from Mary in Matthew.
Sure.
She doesn't speak
Sure,
though.
sure.
Yes, she does.
Okay.
That's Matthew, which we anonymous gospel.
So would you think, so like James just said, I talked to one of the guys that walked on the moon. Is that extraordinary?
Are you talking about way in the past? Walked on the moon?
No,
it was a couple of years
it
ago.
was 2 years, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I talked to Charlie Duke. Do you believe me?
If you said you talked to someone who was on the moon?
Yes.
Mhm.
One of the living moonwalkers.
Now here's how that works. First off, I would know it was one of the living moonwalkers before I talked to you because I could look it on the news. But let's
You look it up.
I had a guy who
You
said
could listen to the interview.
I had a guy who said he was Albert Einstein's son, and his name was Albert. Well, I didn't have any way to check up on him, so I suspended judgment on it. There was nothing staked on it either. So if I heard you come up to me and say you knew someone, I'd say, so what? I mean, like, unless it's $1 million bet and it matters to me somehow, I could say, okay, fine. I wouldn't. I don't even have to believe you.
In that context, my testimony counts or it doesn't count?
It counts.
It counts.
Even though it's secondhand? He wasn't on the moon. He talked to the guy that was on the moon.
Oh, you mean whether he landed on the moon or not?
Mm-hmm. See, we're talking to people that say it's impossible for humans to live on the moon, or to walk on the moon, and that even today we don't have the technology to do it.
I could tell you a story that Charlie told me about what happened on the moon. That he and John Young were playing around doing the Lunar Olympics, and they wanted to do the lunar high jump to see how far each of them could get off the ground. And they didn't really tell NASA they were going to do this. So John Young went up and he came back down. Charlie went up and he fell backwards and landed on his life support. And John looked down at him and goes, "Charlie, that wasn't very smart." And Charlie said up to him, "Yeah, that wasn't very smart." Now, I'm secondhand receiving that information from the guy who fell backwards on his life pack. Does my account count?
Well, you do need to corroborate all testimony. I will say this: you have to corroborate it, and it has to matter. Just say that's exactly what happened. What you told me. I heard you say this. Not that happened. That I heard you say that.
Right.
I would say, oh, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, and I'd walk away.
Okay.
What's that matter? Let's say it really mattered. $1 million on the line, or someone's going to die if I don't get the right answer. Well, then I'm going to search. I'm going to corroborate that testimony. You see, and I don't care.
And you can do that because that video is out there. You can actually corroborate the video of them falling backwards. So I think to your point, what we have in the Gospels are people that could corroborate what was being written, just like you can corroborate what happened to Charlie Duke based on what I said.
Do you know how many basic witnesses we have for the Gospels? We have Paul, we have Mark, we have the Q. Well, we don't have it, but we have it surmised, the Q, and we have the Gospel of Thomas. In the Gospel of Thomas, there's no resurrection. In the Q, there's no resurrection. In
we don't have Q to know.
I know that. I know. No. What we do, we can combine the sayings in the four Gospels and say this, and do the criterion of the similarity and criterion of similarity, and find out which is which. There's no resurrection in Q. All you have is Mark's gospel. Then all you have is Mark's gospel and Paul. Now, Paul says in Acts chapter, he's talking to Festus. And Festus is telling him, what, you would make me a Christian in just one speech or something like that? And he says, not only that, but all around. I cannot be disobedient to the vision I saw. It's the word for vision in there. I cannot be disobedient to that vision. Well, that's what we have in Paul and from Luke, I mean, the Gospel of Acts, if you believe it. And all you have there is Mark, and there's no resurrection story. It cuts off at verse 16. You have Mark, and you have Paul. And second-hand testimony is the kind of stuff you read about, like in Luke and in Matthew, when it comes to the virgin birth, a dream and Joseph, or prophecies that don't hold up. There's not, all you have is
You do believe that Paul was a historical person?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, I have nothing in stake. I have nothing at stake in that.
Wow.
You know, John, what Paul says to Agrippa, though, he tells the king, these things did not happen in a corner, Acts 26:26. So Agrippa and Festus could have found out for themselves, just like you could find out if what I said about Charlie is true. They could find out for themselves. They're not just Paul's going well beyond his visioning, saying, you guys could look into this if you want to. It didn't happen.
I think you underestimate the level of skepticism that people would have had. Even today, how many people believe all kinds of conspiracy theories that they could go check out if they wanted to, and yet they willfully accept them because it fits a narrative that they want to
Sure.
believe.
Sure.
But I think his
Absolutely. I
point
totally
was that Paul was saying that they could have if they wanted to. And
Yeah,
that's
but people
true with
don't.
all conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
well,
well, the problem here is that people were skeptical in the New Testament. The Apostle Thomas was skeptical, and he wanted proof. He wanted something that he could touch, that he could see, and so there were a lot of people who were skeptical about the resurrection of Christ. That's why the apostles went out there and said, "Hey, we are eyewitnesses of these things." And
I'm skeptical
and
of a
there,
lot of things get bantered around in politics now, but millions of people believe them. I mean, and I'm just a voice crying in the wilderness. There's nothing I can do to stop them from believing those things.
well,
Let's take a perfect example. 1 Corinthians, I think it's 15 or whatever, where Paul says 500 people saw the risen Jesus. And what adds to the veracity of it, he says, some of whom are still alive today. You can, like you guys are saying, you can still go out and talk to them. Here's the problem. You can't, I just got through a deposition and they just tear you apart. They want, when did you see these people? How were they dressed? What did they look like? We have no details. We're just taking Paul's word for it. Could be true, but we would, like, John, don't you think we want more evidence?
Hey, Bill, you didn't tell me, were you indicted?
No. It was a claim.
Just kidding.
But do you see
Listen,
what I'm
guys,
saying,
I
John?
hate to break into just when it starts getting interesting, but we are out of time. And so I'm going to let Bill close your thoughts out. But just as a reminder, next month on May 8th at 7 o'clock, Robert M. Bowman of the Institute for Religious Research is going to be talking about the incarnate Christ and his critics, his latest book. And I look forward to see it.
When is this?
Daniel Ray, this is going to be the May 8th at 7 o'clock Central Time. And we will have a focus chapter, and we haven't produced yet, but we've already got 2 podcasts that you can listen to if you don't have time to read the book or get the book. And so hey, Rob is smart, and he's going to be very interesting. You don't want to miss next month. So I'm sorry, Bill, to break in, but finish your thoughts and then we'll say bye.
Here's the mistake.
What was the name of that book again? The book name? Sorry, I didn't realize that was our next. Okay.
The incarnate Christ and his critics.
Okay.
Here's the mistake atheists and Christians make. Atheists make the mistake, there's no evidence for Christianity. Well, Paul is an evidence, some of whom are alive today. it's still a testimony. It's still evidence, but it's weak evidence. It's not good evidence. And Christians make the mistake. Well, it's good enough for me. Yeah, he said it, so I believe it. That settles it. So, John, what do you think?
I don't make that mistake.
Okay, good.
I don't do that.
I
There's a lot of people that don't do that.
Yeah, well,
I'm sure some Christians
A
do.
lot of people. Go ahead, John. You're
A lot of Christians, so I'm sure there's some who do that.
Well,
That's irrelevant.
yeah, I agree. A lot of Christians will say, it says here in my Bible. I mean, they don't take it, they take it uncritically. Quote Paul or quote the Gospel of John. It says here, right here. And I would guess you don't agree with that either, but it's like a lot of them do. They just take it, it says so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
One of the comments that I made in the side chat is that every Christian on the planet could be delusional. That doesn't mean that Christianity is false. It is absolutely irrelevant. What matters is whether the evidence is sufficient, not whether it's convincing. And that's one of the things that we talked about when we had our cosmologist on. And we need to make that distinction between what is sufficient evidence and what is convincing evidence. The whole idea of extraordinary evidence is about what's going to convince you. But I don't care what's going to convince you. The only thing I care about is whether the evidence is sufficient or not. And when somebody says, well, you have to have extraordinary evidence for something, my first question is going to be, then tell me what it means to have extraordinary evidence, and I'm never given an answer to that question. So that means that every time I present evidence, somebody can say, oh, it's not extraordinary evidence, doesn't convince me, so it's no good. And there's the problem, and that's the problem that John, you and I talked about, I don't know, 5 years ago or something like that. I think it's still a problem, and I think it still needs to be addressed.
I think we know what's not extraordinary evidence, though. I think we can list all the ways that doesn't count. And now, unless you can give me a different way apart from those ways that I've mentioned, then you'd have to agree with me. All those ways, the ways I mentioned, are insufficient grounds for belief. I mean, you can't just continue to say, give me a criteria for discovering what all is necessary for there to be an extraordinary event. I had this discussion earlier, maybe half an hour ago. We were talking about that. I mean, I don't always know. You can't always tell, but I know what doesn't count, and that should be enough. And I don't see why you wouldn't agree that that's enough, especially since that's all you have.
That's just a negative way of saying that I have some kind of criteria and you're not matching my criteria. That's really all that's saying. It's still a matter of a lack of criteria for what counts as extraordinary evidence. That is still missing in the whole dialogue. And just to say,
for the people who deny the moon landing, because they won't tell you what criteria, they'll just tell you that what you just gave them doesn't match.
right.
Well, then they give me something and I'll go dig it up for you. When I'm not gonna tell you, but just show it to me. Well, you got to tell me what you're looking for.
Well, I mean, just talk about a criminal trial. I mean, you put things, Exhibit A, Exhibit B, and you have someone who found that evidence on the stand and say, yes, I found that evidence here when I was walking down the hallway or something like that. That's established evidence, you see. No one has to, no one has to say, well, but is that evidence after that point? You can't, well, is that extraordinary? No one asks that question after that point. It's already been established. Yeah. And if you don't have it, you have a table that's blank and nothing's on the table. And the judge says, is there any evidence? And if you have to say, no, I have a private subjective experience or something like that, or my mama told me this, the judge would dismiss the case.
Well, John, thank you again for being a guest and putting yourself through this 2+ hours of interrogation. And I do look forward to having you as a guest author in the future, and for just showing up like you did a couple of months ago, and showing up for one of our just book clubs as an interesting participant.
Well, I love you. I think you're a great guy. Thanks for the meal earlier, you and Brady.
Yes.
And you have a lovely home, and you're a good guy, and can't wait to do it again. Yeah.
And I'm going to try to convince him to hang around Arlington another day and see some of the sights.
There's my wife. You want to see my wife? She She always wants to
Bye.
have a cameo.
Hey, Sheila.
Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you next
Enjoyed
month.
it, John.
All right.